In 1947, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, making it one of the most astonishing archaeological finds of the 20th century. The scrolls featured copies of biblical texts from Isaiah and Ezekiel, to name a few. Along with these was a distinct Jewish text that had been unknown to modern readers until then. It's called the Rule of the Community, or the Manual of Discipline, which outlined a dualistic worldview. The author of the scroll insists that God is the ultimate authority, while two spiritual forces, truth and deceit, exists below him. These forces have two angelic powers, the Prince of Light and the Angel of Darkness, what you call Satan, which accounts for human behavior. Now, in places where the forces of truth and light are dominant, people behave with justice, patience, and compassion. Conversely, when darkness and deceit reign, behavior is unjust, callous, and cruel. This writer's outlook on the world goes beyond the prophetic tradition in that they see evil as an external demonic power instead of an inherent human trait. This force works to bring people under its control. The apocalyptic tradition acknowledges the ongoing battle between good and evil and does not expect any gradual betterment in human nature. Instead, it is God who will bring a decisive change and usher in a new age. In this way, it sharply draws a line between the present and the future. In the Dead Sea text, known as the War of the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness, the writer paints a picture of a cosmic scale battle between good and evil. God is expected to lead his forces to victory over Satan and his followers, ultimately prevailing and paving the way for a new era of peace and goodness. The Dead Sea Scrolls, although interesting to modern scholars, were largely confined to a small circle of Jewish readers and had little impact on the development of apocalyptic tradition as a whole. This is evidenced by the book of Daniel, which is an apocalypse in full technicality. I'm going to explain that very shortly, but let's look at the book of Daniel briefly, a historical account of it. The book of Daniel was written after Alexander the Great's time. It was likely put in its final form in the 2nd century BCE. Now, as mentioned earlier, scholars classify Daniel as an apocalypse in a technical sense. What do we mean by that? Multiple types of writings have apocalyptic elements. The War Scroll, for example. But the term apocalypse is used in a technical sense for narratives which provide insight into God's heavenly realm and what will happen on earth. Daniel is an example of such a narrative. So it means that an author writes a story of visions and explains them with the assistance of an angelic interpreter. This was part of the literary style of Jewish authors during this period, many of whom used pen names to write narrative apocalypses, like the book of Daniel. Many modern authors do use pen names, such as Samuel Clemens using the name Mark Twain or Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Jewish apocalyptic authors from this period did the same, but instead of choosing fictitious names, they would pick historical figures from their own tradition. For instance, one was written under the name Enoch from Genesis, and another was called Testament of Moses after the prophet. Daniel was written by an author with the same name as a Jewish sage who lived centuries before. The last half of Daniel consists of apocalyptic visions that illustrate the flow of history through fantastic imagery. He describes 4 beasts rising out of the sea: a lion with eagle's wings, a bear with tusks coming out of its mouth, a winged leopard, and a monstrous beast with 10 horns. This vivid depiction is not meant to obfuscate or conceal. Each beast symbolizes an empire mentioned elsewhere in the book. Daniel mentions the Babylonians, Medes, Persians, and Greeks. The author is not only highlighting these empires, but emphasizing their beastly character by showing how they repeatedly conquered and oppressed. He further emphasizes this through a reference to Antiochus Epiphanes from Syria, who suppressed Jewish religious practices in the 2nd century BCE and turned the Jerusalem temple into a sanctuary for a foreign deity. Daniel describes the travesty of Antiochus by referring to a desolating sacrilege and how it made no sense that the righteous should suffer the most. He emphasizes that one after another, all of these forms of tyranny will eventually fall. This signals hope for a new kingdom ruled by God that will end oppression and usher in something new. He says that central figure in the drama will be known as the Son of Man. Daniel refers to the Son of Man, who is given dominion over all. This figure has never been fully identified, and some suggest it was originally an angel or a symbol of the whole people of Israel. Later interpretations saw it as a messianic figure that had a major impact on early Christianity, who identified this figure as the risen Jesus. Daniel speaks of the end of this age, with a resurrection of the dead, judgment and God's justice extending beyond. This theme is connected to God's sovereign power to give life, marking his reign. The resurrection is seen as a time when people are held accountable to God, as justice then extends into the future age. The book of Daniel speaks to a society where people who followed God's ways suffered for it. To remain true to their convictions, they needed a sense of justice that would eventually win out. This hope was embodied in the coming of God's kingdom and was transformed with Jesus of Nazareth. This gave people the courage to live lives of integrity, even in an unfair world.